Here we go. All right, so welcome. I'm Stacey Montgomery. I'm the Capital Programs Administrator at the Maryland Historical Trust, and I'm here with my colleagues Taylor Means and Bill Hirsch, the Capital Grants and Loans Administrator at the Maryland Historical Trust, and Taylor Means is with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Today you're attending the AHPP Grant Program Application Q&A session. You'll be able to find a PDF version of this slide deck on the MHT website, and you can download that and click any of the links that are spoken about today. So before we get started, I do want to mention that we've already conducted several webinars and workshops where we discussed general information about the program. So if you didn't have a chance to attend a general overview webinar or workshop, I strongly recommend that you watch our pre-recorded FY26 general overview webinar, since we aren't going to spend a lot of time on the general program information in this webinar. This Q&A session is geared towards organizations that have decided to submit an application this round, and it'll take a deeper look at specific sections of the application and provide guidance on how to be more competitive. So very briefly, I will go over some of the basics of the program and this year's grant round. The AHPP grant is administered as a collaboration between the Maryland Historical Trust and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. This grant program funds capital projects for properties that contribute to Maryland's African American history and heritage. It's a very competitive grant with an allocation of $5 million in available funding this year. Like I said, it's competitive. There's a maximum individual grant amount of $250,000 and a suggested minimum request of $10,000. The AHPP, someone can hear. The AHPP is can be awarded to nonprofit organizations, businesses, individuals, and private entities, state and federal agencies as well. If you're a past applicant or past or current awardee, there are no restrictions on reapplying every year. However, we do recommend that if you're a current grantee, that you or awardee, that you discuss with your project monitor any recommendations that they might have for a new application, like what is the proper scope of work, how to proceed with that. All applicants except individuals do have to be registered with the Maryland the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, or you may know it as SDAT, and you need to be in good standing with the state to apply. For a project to be eligible for the grant, the work must be associated with a capital improvement. That means that the scope of work that you provide in your application should be construction or construction related. The grant cannot fund broader studies such as historic context reports, master plans, genealogy, or research for historical interpretation or brochures. However, the grant can fund pre-development services that will directly lead to a capital project. This would include work like ground penetrating radar at a cemetery, engineering studies, historic buildings assessments, architectural drawings, or bidding services. This grant can also fund new construction and acquisition. Finally, the FY26 application round will close on June 30th at 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Staff are not going to be working until midnight, so we strongly suggest that you submit your application well in advance of the closing date, unless in case you run into technical issues with your electronic submission. The application is online, so we do want to make sure you give us plenty of time. If you do run into issues late on the night of the 30th, you can visit MHT's main grants website for some helpful tutorials, or send us an email explaining the issue and we'll follow up with you the next day. That being said, we do not recommend waiting until 11 p.m. on the 30th to apply. So let's talk about getting started. There are a few resources you can use to get started on your application. To create a new application, you'll need to follow, you want to follow the links on the left-hand side of the main program webpage, seen here on the screen, in the green boxes. It's really important, follow the green boxes. Okay. This year, individuals and organizations will follow separate links to apply. You should apply as an individual if you own your site as an individual, so maybe it's your own personal home, or if you do not have an established organization that is registered with the IRS and State Department of Assessment and Taxation. So maybe you have a newly formed nonprofit, but you don't have all your documents in order yet. This year, MHT is transitioning our grants management system, so the application portal may look a bit different. What that means for you is if you are a returning applicant, you'll need to create a new login ID and password in the new system and use the new links in the green boxes to access the FY26 application. In this new system, you may be also able to also see applications for other grants that you've applied for that also use the same system. If you'd like to access applications from previous grant rounds, like maybe you applied last year or the year before, you can use the My Grant Account button pre-FY26 applications link on the same page. It's in a blue box here, and that's down at the bottom. So we recommend that you access any old application materials by the end of June, as the public portal will go away as part of this transition. And remember that you can't start a new application in the old portal. So green links to new applications, blue links to old applications if you have them. So, application resources. Navigating to the guidelines and resources page on the MHT website, you can locate the grant guidelines, which go into further detail about the eligibility of applications, application submittal process, how to complete the application, how the application will be reviewed by the committee, and additional information concerning timelines, budgets, and eligible expenses. The same webpage also contains links to materials you'll use to submit your application, shown here in the box. These include copies of the budget spreadsheet template, the property owner letter of consent template, a document that helps you get started with the online application, and the scoring rubric. We've recently added a direct link to the narrative about this year's ASALA theme as well, which is also linked in the application. You can also find further down on the page slides from webinars and a link to our YouTube channel that has pre-recorded versions of these webinars. If you've reviewed these documents and have questions, of course, please don't hesitate to contact grant staff with questions. Our contact information is on the website, and it'll also be available at the end of the presentation. So now we'll talk about the application itself. First, the general approach, and then specific sections. When you're thinking about your project and how to make your application more competitive, it helps to know how the team will review the application. Focus your energy on the three most heavily weighted sections. Be sure to clearly describe your project goals, your organization's mission, and how the overall project will provide a public benefit beyond the needs of yourself or your organization. Be sure your application answers questions like, why is your project important? Why should your project be funded this year? What will funds specifically be used to pay for? And how realistic is your budget and timeline? Reviewers are considering the importance of your site, the urgency of the project, the readiness, and the broader impact of the project. Refer to the grant guidelines and scoring rubric while developing your responses in the application. In addition to understanding how your application will be reviewed, consider how to make the application easier for the committee to review. Be clear and concise. Make sure that all sections are filled out, even if there isn't a lot of information to provide. For example, many applicants skip questions about other funding sources or just say none, rather than explaining or sharing that maybe they've applied for other grants and you're waiting to hear back, or that you've maintained your site through volunteers who will support the project with in-kind services like bookkeeping or project management. Ensure that all information you want to give the reviewers is in the appropriate sections of the application. Pay attention to the smaller details and formatting, and that will help your application be easier to review. Pro tip, if you have applied for the program in the past and you intend to apply again for the same project, please do not just resubmit your previous application. Think about the reasons it may not have been funded and revise the application so those issues are addressed. Submitting the same application over and over again will not make it more competitive. So while all sections of the application are important, and should be fully completed. There are 3 sections that are given more weight in the scoring rubric. The project description, significance and urgency, and public benefit, impact, and local commitment are sections where the majority of the points are awarded in the scoring rubric. Being descriptive, clear, and concise in these sections will make it easier for the review committee to understand your project. Reviewers look at a lot of applications, and we hope that by breaking down the most heavily weighted sections, you can understand what's needed to make your application stand out. So now my colleague Taylor Means will talk about these sections, starting with the project description first.
Thank you, Stacy. The project description section is where you will provide specific information about the capital project you are applying for and how it will be completed. Within this section, the construction project description is where you will give a general description of the capital improvements planned for your site. This description may go beyond the specific request for this grant round. So for example, if you are raising funds to build a new visitor center on the site that will cost several $1 million and are requesting AAHPP grant funds for pre-development costs or an elevator, describe the larger plan for the visitor center in the construction project description section. In the grant project scope of work section, list specific items that you're requesting funding for from the AAHPP grant this round. In the example above, this is where you would list specific pre-development work such as architectural drawings or engineering services or work related to the elevator design and installation. These items should correspond with the line items in your budget and any estimates you submit. You will be able to upload any estimates that you obtain as an attachment later in the application. When completing the project description section, make sure that the reviewers will be able to easily understand your project. List only construction-related tasks in this section. Detail what the grant funds, if awarded, will pay for specifically. Be clear about where on the building or at the site the work will take place. The more specific you can be as to how the project will be carried out, the fewer questions the reviewers will have about your project. If you receive previous AAHPP funding or another grant has paid for an earlier phase of the project, include that information in the construction project description section, not the grant project scope of work section. Do not include non-capital work like digitizing records or genealogy research in the project description section. In the key steps and timeline section, you will want to modify the sample timeline provided in the grant guidelines to reflect the benchmarks of your project. The first items addressed should be the most urgent. If you know there is a lot of capital work to be done, but don't know what project would be most urgent, the first request in your application may be a building conditions assessment or historic structures report. If you received previous AAHPP or other funding for earlier phases of your project and want to include this in your timeline, make sure it is clear to the reviewers that this work has already been funded by a previous grant. Reviewers will be scoring these sections to understand how the project will help protect the historic site, how well the scope of work addresses the critical needs of the site, and how specific and comprehensive the scope of work is. An application that focuses on new construction when the historic building is failing will not be as competitive as one that seeks to restore a historic building and then begin the pre-development new construction. How to review and modify the sample timeline in the grant guidelines and talk to contractors about how long your projects might take and what kinds of lead times these projects have. Estimates and timeframes should be provided by contractors for free. You're not obligated to hire a contractor that you receive an estimate from during the application process. All grantees are required to hire through a competitive bidding process following the award. So if your application indicates that you have already hired a specific contractor to do work, your application may be considered ineligible. If your site is historic, please remember that if MHT takes an easement on the property, this will take time and the easement conveyance process must be completed before any funds can be distributed. Also keep in mind that the grant cannot fund work that is already underway, So if your timeline indicates that work has already started or will start before the awards are made in December, your application may not be considered. So pro tip, don't forget to include any pre-development costs that may be required to complete your project. These costs may include a building conditions assessment, architectural drawings, or ground penetrating radar. This section of your application is also heavily weighted, the significance section. So significance refers to the significance of your site itself. You should discuss the history of your site in detail and its connection to African American history and culture in Maryland. Was the building or site pivotal to a significant local, regional, or national event? Is it associated with a specific person, group, or movement? Is your site within a historically Black community that has been overlooked or is threatened by erasure? Please keep in mind that the significance of a place might change over time, often above and beyond what made it important historically. Think about why your site is not only significant to the past, but also why it is important today. Was a historic school building later used as a home base for an important civil rights organization? Is your site a cemetery or monument that provides a place of reflection? Does your organization use your site to serve the community and share an important history? Why is this site important to you today? Don't assume that all reviewers are familiar with your community or site. Provide context for any names or places in the application. You know your site better than any reviewer, so make the case for why your site's contributions to African American history and culture in Maryland is important and should potentially be funded this cycle. A pro tip, include information and photos of events or displays that show how your site shares its story and serves the community. So now I'll switch it or give the mic back over to Stacy, and she will discuss project urgency and public benefit.
Thank you, Taylor. So the project urgency section falls under the larger project description in the application. However, a strong answer to this question can significantly impact funding decisions. When completing the urgency section, reviewers are looking to understand the critical issues facing your site. Is the poor condition of the site preventing it from being used? If no action is taken now, what further damage will occur to the building, and how long will it take for the damage to be irreversible? Is there a long-awaited opportunity to purchase a site or an anniversary associated with your site that your organization is preparing for? Clearly explain why your project is critical and needs to be funded this round. Projects that can start once the funding is available are more competitive than projects that will need several years to move forward or that require more fundraising to achieve. The goal of the grant grant funding is to help protect these buildings and sites, not just to address aesthetic or general maintenance issues. So think about what is the most critical item or items to deal with to prevent further degradation of the site and prioritize those work items. If you're applying to refinish the floors or to build an addition and there's a hole in the roof of the existing building or the foundation is deteriorated, the reviewers will note that the structural issues that are much more pressing are not being addressed, and this section of your application may not score as highly. Likewise, if your project will cost $700,000 to complete and you don't have the rest of the funds ready, your application will not score as well as a project that needs only this grant funding to meet your funding target. So a pro tip is, if you're requesting funds for new construction, make the case on how the new building will meet an urgent community need. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the public benefit. The public benefit is another heavily weighted section in the application. There are 6 questions in the public benefit section of the application that get to the heart of how the site is and will be used. The public benefit of your project refers to how the completed project will positively impact the broader community or the general public. High-scoring projects have a clear public benefit and will increase access to the site, allowing others who may have no understanding of the site to be educated about its history or to continue to use it as an active space. If the project will allow your organization to enhance historical programming, to provide additional public accessibility, or to create partnerships with other organizations, you should make those cases in this section. Think about how visitors will engage with the site, what history is being conveyed, and how will you use the site in the future. Will a roofing project allow an organization to continue its mission by reoccupying the building or providing much needed public meeting space? Will the restoration of a historic building reactivate a physical touchstone for the community? Will adding accessibility to your site allow more visitors to understand its unique connection to African American history? Elaborate on how the site will specifically be used to educate the public and if it will stimulate other preservation projects related to African American history and culture. Will interpretive markers be installed that will detail the significance of the building? Will school groups visit the site to gain an understanding of an earlier time? If your site is event space, will a portion of it be set aside for historical education or the display of artifacts, primary documents, and other relics that can be easily viewed by visitors? Are there other historic sites in your community that would benefit from the enhancements at your site or would build upon your site's success? Provide a clear educational component to your project that will illustrate the impact that your project will have on visitors and how they will walk away with a better understanding of your historic site. So a pro tip here is to include a letter of support from a partner or group that utilizes your site to demonstrate the value of the site to the broader community. So now we're going to switch to documentation. We often have applications that really effectively spell out the project, its significance, the public benefit, but they're missing some of the documents that we need to have to understand the project or are required to establish an applicant's eligibility. So if you put all your effort into getting all these sections spelled out and you're missing these critical documents, that can really impact your ability for your application to move forward. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about these common documents that are either omitted or not completed correctly. First, photographs, which seems pretty obvious, but photographs are probably the easiest way to show the significance of your property, its context, and the critical issues that face it that grant funding will hopefully address. Providing clear photographs lets reviewers see exactly what the issues are and the severity of any damage that needs to be fixed or the importance of a historic feature that will be restored. At least one of the photographs should be a context photo that shows the entire building or site, not just the area where work will take place. This photo will give reviewers a sense of the overall site. And if you're selected for an award, this photo will be what MHT uses in their outreach materials and social media posts. So make sure that your building or site is in focus, not skewed, free of obstructions, an image that you'd like to have distributed widely to the public. You'll also need to provide photos of the area where work will occur to match what's described in your grant project scope of work section. If you're applying for roof repairs, be sure to include photos that show the conditions of the existing roof. The photos of the area should be clear and should capture enough of the issue to let the reviewer make an informed decision as to the severity of the problem. If your site faces problems like flooding, taking photos during a major rainstorm that show the serious nature of the problem can help enhance your application. If your cemetery has numerous headstones that have been knocked over or damaged, include several compelling examples. Good photos can enhance your written narrative about project urgency. You will need to provide at least 10 photos as an attachment to your application. To help with this year, we've developed a photo template that can be found on our website and is embedded in the application itself. It's pretty simple. All you need to do is click on the blank box in the template, and the program will allow you to select photos from your computer to upload. The template will automatically format the photo to fit in the box. Then you can add a caption to that photo and upload the whole thing as a Word document to your application. You cannot upload individual photos, so please use this template. So our pro tip for here is to take clear photos of the most critical areas and provide captions to explain to the reviewer what they're looking at. Remember that reviewers see a lot of applications, so help them connect the photos in your application to your specific request and leave memorable photos in there. Next, we have organizational documents. If you're a business or an organizational applicant, you'll need to provide a series of organizational documents. MHT will need a copy of your IRS determination letter or an umbrella letter if your organization is part of a larger one, a full copy of your articles of incorporation, a full copy of your bylaws, and proof that your organization is registered with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. You'll need to also show that you're in good standing with SDAT. You will not be considered for a grant if you're not registered with SDAT and in good standing. You can go right now to that website, and that information is available in the grant guidelines and in our general overview webinar. You can go right now to the Maryland SDAT site and check your status. And if you need to address it, if you are not in good standing, if it has been forfeited, this is the time to make those corrections to address it. And it's generally fairly quickly done. So you can get a temporary status change, a letter of temporary status if you've addressed that, and then they'll send you a letter once you're in full standing. But please take care of this now. When you're submitting organizational documents, also, please don't just submit snippets or certain pages of your documents, because that hinders MHT's ability to review those documents for the kinds of information we need to determine if you're eligible to receive a grant. Also, all applicants need to provide a property owner consent letter. This is a requirement, and if we don't have it, again, your application will not move forward. The letter states that the owner of the property is aware of and supports the project for which grant funds will be used. It also stipulates that the owner of the property agrees to the conveyance of a preservation easement or agreement to the Maryland Historical Trust. If you aren't familiar with easements yet, really quickly, they are deed restrictions that protect your site or building from inappropriate alterations or degradation due to a lack of maintenance. Basically, the easement acts kind of like a miniature historic district, but for your site. And MHT would have to review all work that takes place to any area of the site that is covered by the easement, regardless of how the project is being funded. We won't go into the whole specifics of the easement right now, but we do have a presentation on MHT's YouTube channel, and there's a lot of good information on MHT's easement site. Since MHT might take an easement on, people generally ask what sites MHT might take an easement on, and that is generally sites that are listed on or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. So it's important to note that and to get information about that if your site is one of those. Also, it's important to note that that property owner letter of consent must be signed by the SDAT listed owner of the building or site. So please verify in SDAT who is listed as the owner of your site so you can know that and make any corrections to that ahead of your submission as well. Applicants cannot consent to work on a building or structure that they don't own. So if a larger organization like a mother church is the owner, please reach out to them to get their signature. Those organizations may also have questions about the easement, and giving them some time and to connect with MHT staff to understand that would be helpful, and we're happy to provide them with that information. But projects with unsigned property owner consent letters won't be eligible for funding. The other letters you can provide are letters of support. They can come as attachments to your application, and they can also be sent separately. A letter of support should be drafted by someone who is familiar with your site and understands the positive effects of that the project will have. The letters can come from congregants or patrons, ancestors of the people who are historically associated with the site, community leaders, other nonprofits that might have an interest in the site's preservation, and local, state, and national legislators. For groups that are larger, like church congregations, instead of having letters come from every single congregant, consider putting together a single letter signed by multiple congregants or some kind of petition. That way, you won't have so many letters to submit. We really suggest that you aim for 2 to 6 letters of support for your application. The letters of support must be signed by the person who drafted that, or it will not be included in the application packet for the reviewers. If you're applying for funding for the exact same scope of work that you applied for last year, either for an MHT grant or some other grant, you can use the same letter from last year, so long as it is, again, the exact same scope of work that's listed in your application and it's not older than 1 year at the time of application. So just our pro tip for this is to make sure that every letter you submit is signed by the correct person. So now Taylor is going to talk about project management.
Thank you. So while project management is not as heavily weighted as the 3 sections that were just discussed, it is still an important section to discuss and is something that is important to consider before submitting an application. The scoring of this section evaluates who will be on the grant team for the project and what previous experience they have with grants and capital projects. Managing a grant and a capital project require individual or organizational capacity. The administrative capability section evaluates who from your organization will be a part of the grants management team. Forming a management team can help maintain steady communications with MHT grant staff and contractors to ensure your project is completed successfully. The application will ask for information on people within your organization who have relevant experience, as well as whether you have consulted with any professionals. If people within your organization have grants management experience or work in building trades, their involvement may be helpful. The application allows you to submit the resumes of critical team members. These resumes should highlight relevant experience, and if you don't have this capacity within your organization, you may want to consider hiring a project manager and should include this as a line item in your budget request. Project management can account for up to 10% of the total award, but can only be paid out through the grant if the role is competitively bid. The grant cannot pay for someone within your organization to be the project manager. If your organization has already sought input from professionals, or if you hired a professional in a previous phase, you should also include their role in the grant project under the consultants and partners question and attach their resume. Examples of consultants and partners can be architects, engineers, or contractors. People listed under the consultants and partners section can advise you through your project, but if you have already hired them before a grant award, they cannot be paid through the AAHPP grant. If you have any plans or reports from these partners that are relevant to the project, please upload these as attachments. This can include architectural drawings, building conditions assessments, or ground penetrating radar reports. Ideally, your team should be led by someone who knows the organization well and is a good communicator. There's a place in the application to include the contact information for key members and to identify a primary contact person. We'll be reaching out to the primary contact with any questions or to request missing information over the summer when the staff review each submitted application. Please be sure whoever is listed as the primary contact is responsive to email and available over the summer to respond to requests. So hopefully this information will help you develop a strong application for the AAHPP grant. And as a reminder, the slide deck is located on our webpage with clickable links. Remember that the deadline is June 30th this year at 11:59, and please take advantage of the resources we shared with you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can see our contact information on the screen here. Thank you for sitting